Hello, Kim Sal, Emotional Mastery. This is the third in my series about the brain and how it works, how we have learnt to be who we are, how we end up where we are. In this one, I'm talking about the 7 to 24 period where we start to move on from the primitive emotional brain. In last week's episode, I was talking about those early learnings, 0 to 7 or 8, where we are working purely in the now. It's very much, is this good or bad, or, is it a threat or not? By the time you get to 7 or 8, the brain is beginning to develop the front part of the brain, the neocortex, that prefrontal cortex that is all about thinking, rationalizing and analyzing. Now, as you can understand, we don't go from our emotional brain straight to this. So this takes place over the ages of about 7 or 8 to about 24. There's no hard and fast rules, as you can appreciate. And what's happening during that time is it's creating a whole raft of new neural pathways. The thing is, whilst it's creating these abilities to rationalize and analyze, to move from understanding the world in black and white to shades of gray, being able to discern those subtle differences that we just take for granted every day, what happens is that it's still built around those early learnings that were very much in the moment. And this is where it can be a bit of a problem. So the early learnings will still drive the current behaviors. And one of the ways it does that is to make sure that we're fitting in somehow. And this is a big thing because prehistorically, or in our early development as humans, if we were not fitting in with the tribe, the chances are we'd be turned out and left to fend for ourselves, and therefore more likely to die either of the weather conditions, wild animals, or perhaps other tribes. So it's really important to fit in. And this becomes quite noticeable as you get into the teenage years. I often joke that it's at that age where the smoking, drinking, sex, rock and roll, drugs, all that comes in, because at this point, you're not yet an adult fully formed, but you are beginning to think like one. But you also need these early learnings of fitting in some way. So many people I've seen in the past who were learning to deal with various issues find that it does start in the teenage years, not exclusively, but very often. And of course, you start to do things that perhaps you wouldn't normally do just to fit in, or you are doing things so far removed from fitting in that actually you're feeling excluded and separated from your peer group. Whichever way it happens doesn't much matter in terms of how it affects you long term, because the effects can still be the same. You've got some hang-ups, something left over, some sort of drivers driving you down a certain route. What is interesting, I think, is the understanding of what is happening at this point. The fact that we are still growing and molding as who we are. How many of us have struggled to know what we want to do when schools are trying to channel us in to make a decision? Some people will absolutely know. They've got a strength or something they really love. They absolutely know. But for the most of us, we are pushed into something that may not be of our own. And what I find particularly interesting about this is it's not just schools, but maybe our parents or our peer group or something else has driven us to take a decision that potentially affects the rest of our lives in some way, shape, or form. So there's a lot going on. Your brain is expanding. It's beginning to understand things in a different way. It's being driven by those early learnings. It's trying to fit in. It's trying to learn all the stuff that we learn in those years, because let's face it, we've got lots of exams going on, the GCSEs, the A-levels, the university degrees, Maybe you're studying professionally for something else or an apprenticeship. Loads going on. We're trying to find out who we are. We're falling in love and finding that that's a very painful process. It's a really difficult time. So if you've got teenagers, be a little kinder for them, because they're still learning. They just don't know who they are. They think they do, but actually then they don't. So be kind to them. It's a very tough time, and I usually find that when I'm dealing with stuff that people bring up, this is a very large chunk of time when it can occur. It's not exclusively, but it's a major part. So next week, what I want to do is look at what happens after the age of about 24. The brain starts to feel like it's sorted itself out. It's got things in control. I know what I'm doing. Or does it? Because what happens is that it will stay the same because it's all about keeping you safe, even if the same isn't good for you. And sometimes it can be 20 years later that you'll suddenly wake up and think, oh, what happened? But more on that next week. Any questions, please do drop down below. This has been a very high level, very broad overview of your brain between 7 and 24. Thank you for tuning in.